Let me state the bottom line up front. My informed assessment, as a person with as much access as anyone to our government's intelligence during the initial year of the pandemic, has been and continues to be that a lab leak is the only explanation credibly supported by our intelligence, by science, and by common sense. From a view inside the IC, if our intelligence and evidence supporting a lab leak theory was placed side by side with our intelligence and evidence pointing to a natural origins or spillover theory, the lab leak side of the ledger would be long, convincing, even overwhelming, while the spillover side would be nearly empty and tenuous. Let me state the bottom line up front.
That was testimony from the House Select Subcommittee on COVID's second lab leak hearing from today, where former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe and former State Department official David Feith are testifying. So this is very interesting. Here's another former high-ranking official saying that he is definitely leaning in the lab leak direction. This follows, of course, a similar judgment call by the Energy Department and the FBI, who are the formal government agencies who have said that they think with varying degrees of confidence that lab leak is more likely than the alternative. That is something Dr. Robert Redfield, the former director of the CDC, also believes. We've interviewed here on Rising. People should definitely check that out if they missed that one. It was a great interview. And then the other part of this is that John Ratcliffe also suggests that Dr. Fauci misled Congress when he said that when he discussed gain-of-function research in Wuhan, Ratcliffe said some of Dr. Fauci's testimony is inconsistent with some of the information that remains classified, as well as inconsistent with some of the information that is publicly available. So my next question would be, why is that information still classified? I would like to see it, please. Let's declassify it and let's see it. Stop hiding things. Let us know. I want to know. I want to know exactly what the government knows.
Yeah, I think this is congruent with some of the reporting that we've heard so far and the growing public consensus that if not plausible, it is no longer unacceptable to acknowledge the possibility of lab leak theory as a predominant prevailing theory here about the origin of the COVID pandemic. I guess my only question would be, Ratcliffe does have a history of engaging in some escalatory language with respect to China. Back in 2020, he called China the greatest threat to freedom since World War II. He wrote an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal at the time saying the intelligence is clear. Beijing intends to dominate the U.S. and the rest of the planet economically, militarily, and technologically. And it's not to say that obviously lab leak theory could not be true, but I do sometimes wonder about some opportunism in who is making these arguments and really strong-arming these arguments into a case to escalate tensions with China. We saw what happened with Nancy Pelosi in Taiwan, and although there has been this anti-war sentiment among some conservative elected politicians, more so than I would say among some liberal politicians or even left politicians, it does sometimes seem like they're arguing in favor of a war in the alternative. So no on Ukraine because we need to focus on China. And I am a little concerned about whether or not lab leak, even if true, is being weaponized in a way that ultimately we should just keep an eye on. Yeah, look, that's fair. And if this was the only, official making this claim, I mean, you have to take it with a grain of salt because we don't have access to the documents he's referring to. I wish we did. We should have access to those documents. Stop hiding them. Make it all transparent. The overclassification of everything as sensitive and not fit for the American public's consumption is, I'm so beyond it and so sick of it. So I want to know what they know. Let's actually play that clip I just referenced about the gain-of-function research in Wuhan.
Dr. Redfield, whether the NIH was funding or had funded gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute, and he told me, direct quote, "No doubt," unquote, NIH was funding this research in Wuhan, refuting Dr. Fauci's claims. I'll start with you, Mr. Ratcliffe. Do you agree with Dr. Redfield?
I do.
Given what we know now, if you were in Dr. Fauci's position, would you have denied that the NIH's role in gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab?
No.
Do you think that Dr. Fauci lied under oath?
I think that some of Dr. Fauci's testimony is inconsistent with some of the intelligence that we have that remains classified, as well as inconsistent with some information that is publicly available.
Do you think that?
And I would just recall for everyone that when Dr. Fauci was deposed with respect to the lawsuit from the state of Missouri and about social media censorship, et cetera, relating to COVID, and he was asked about the pause on gain-of-function research and acknowledged that exceptions were granted even during the pause for some gain-of-function research to be done, and he was asked if he signed off on those personally, and he said he couldn't recall. Various papers may have crossed his desk. So now, it could be the case that he's being just straightforwardly dishonest and lying. It could also be the case that he doesn't remember, or he's recalling with imperfect memory what exactly was going on. And then there's also a kind of academic debate that's very important now about what counts as gain-of-function research, because he and Rand Paul will get into it, and he'll be like, well, what you're describing isn't technically gain-of-function research. That honestly seems very beside the point, because if you're narrowly defining it and saying we didn't do that exact thing.
Is it the kind of research that could cause a lab leak and a global pandemic?
Right.
That's what we want to know.
Right. So yeah, this is very interesting. And again, I continue to think that the only way we're going to really know is to just classify some of this information. We actually have a little bit more from the hearing. Let's play that.
We pushed the Trump administration to do everything they could to get our scientists to the hot zone, et cetera. So I can very well argue the lab leak theory because, China did not cooperate. They did not let folks get in there, et cetera. I can also make a case for why initially folks thought it jumped from an animal to a human. At this point, I think, as Dr. Lowenthal said, I don't think we're ever going to get an answer because I don't think China will ever let us get to the hot zone, will ever let us interview folks. I don't even think those scientists probably are around. I don't think the data that we would have to look at is there. So I think we have to take both theories seriously. We pushed it.
That is a change of pace, some more openness than we have historically heard from especially Democratic representatives.
Absolutely. But I don't want to hear, well, I don't think we'll ever know. Like, that could be your conclusion, but people who've decided they think it one way or the other have read documents that the public hasn't seen yet. So how do you know how I'm going to rule on this thing when I haven't seen the documents that Mr. Ratcliffe was referring, and they haven't all been made transparent, and we have to hear more testimony from people who might know something. Maybe China will never give us the exact access we want. I mean, that itself is not totally damning, but is very suspicious, and it's something we just have to deal with, and is not ideal at all. But again, maybe our own official, because it's not really about blaming, it's certainly not about blaming the Chinese people.
Sure.
Contrary to the other theory, which does kind of have something about cultural practices, this theory is not about blaming the people of China. It's about blaming a specific laboratory and then a lack of government transparency and a cover-up, and also research that our own government funded, and that many health agencies of all kind of political, of all ethnic origins, of all national origins have supported doing.
It does start to feel like you filibustered for 2 or 3 years so that it was impossible to know. Then you acknowledge that lab leak is a possibility, but you throw your hands up in the air and say, well, now we'll never know. And it does feel a little bit neat and convenient to immediately jump from, okay, it could be, to, oh, well, I guess, who knows? Which is kind of what I feel like the posture is becoming now, even among some of these Democratic representatives. So we'll look forward to covering more of what happens in that hearing. But for now, we'll get to more Rising after this.